Welcome everybody, I'm Ben Morgan from the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and this is our Tuesday night, 25th of August 2020 Facebook Live broadcast. This evening I'm going to be catching up with David Pryor, who is the founder and director of Daysl Avionics, to learn more about a story which frankly should be leaving most of us in the aviation industry shaking our heads. David's company is built around designing and manufacturing avionics components. And in the course of that business, he was needing to work with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And in doing so, ended up exposing himself and the business to many years of bureaucratic nightmare. A nightmare that ended up costing hundreds of thousands of dollars and has led to David and his family being forced to sell off an investment property in order to pay these costs, an outcome that should never have occurred. We're often, when we deal with the government and the Senate, we're making statements about the aviation industry. What we try to do is to put forward our concerns that Australian opportunity, that is manufacturing and design, opportunity for the aviation industry is going by the wayside as a result of over-regulation and complexity of regulation. And it can be sometimes a very difficult topic to try and explain, especially when you've got a 1 hour window to try and put some testimony forward so that the senators can understand. And so the subjects that we will be talking about tonight are actually quite complicated in terms of their regulatory context. We're going to try and keep the conversation at a fairly, I guess, layman level to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to understand what has gone so catastrophically wrong in CASA's processes and how this has ended up really destroying the opportunity that this business should be enjoying right now. Along with David, we're joined by Wayne Moore. Wayne is a veteran former CASA airworthiness surveyor and maintenance inspector. He's worked for the Civil Aviation Safety Authority for 2 decades, and he too is frustrated. And he has joined us this evening to speak of those frustrations and to provide his perspective on how CASA Incompetence is undermining the ability of the Australian aviation industry to move forward. And if it's left in that situation, we are likely to continue losing as we venture beyond 2020. Joining us as well is Cannane. Ken is a regular on these programs. He's the Executive Director of the Aircraft Maintenance Repair Overhaul Business Association. And Ken and many of his maintenance and engineering members, I guess, also experience these difficulties. So he's a fantastic panelist to be able to throw some questions to. Before we jump into tonight's program, however, I would like to speak very briefly on an issue which is at the front right now, and that is the situation developing between Angel Flight and the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. Last week, we reported that the Civil Aviation Safety Authority had issued letters of demands to aircraft owners and pilots seeking data and information in what it claims is a research effort. Now, if there's one thing we know about CASA, you provide them the information, you may very well be providing them the tools and resources to hang yourself. And so the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association issued a notice to our members and industry supporters saying, you are required to respond to this. However, please wait. We'd like to obtain some senior counsel advice. I'm pleased to say that we will have a joint statement issued between AOPA and Angel Flight tomorrow, which will provide some more information to our members. But I just wanted to provide an update on some information that has come to hand this evening. Understanding that the CASA requests have been placed on pilots during the COVID-19 pandemic, many of our members, especially in Victoria, are simply unable, in many cases, to get the information that CASA is demanding. And so on behalf of aircraft owners and pilots, an application was made to CASA to provide, or request, sorry, a 28-day extension to these letters. That's quite a reasonable request, and a request that should have been met by CASA with a simple yes, that's fair and reasonable. However, typical of CASA, the answer is no. And they will require each and every individual pilot that requires an extension to write an individual application in what I can only imagine will tie up plenty of staff members' time at CASA's writing individual letters of responses, a situation that a simple extension for everybody would have solved. Tomorrow, Angel Flight will in fact submit an application to the courts, and they will be seeking to set aside CASA's demands on the basis that these demands have been issued for what is believed to be an improper purpose. Now, this is obviously a important step in the process, and we're going to keep all of our members abreast as this unfolds. So I can't say too much more about that this evening, but I wanted to let the members and the industry supporters of AOPA understand that we are working side by side with Angel Flight, and what we hope from this is we get some sensibility. So thank you everyone for joining in. Standard rules regarding these panel discussions exist, and that is we're not here to bash CASA. We're not here to bash individuals. What we're here to do is we're here to have an open and candid conversation about issues that are genuinely impacting on the performance of our industry and our ability as a nation to go forward and have aviation success. And so I welcome you all to the panel discussion, and I thank you all very much for having this public conversation, because now more than ever, it is critical that our industry stand up and start talking about the things that have been done to the industry, things that have been done to the individuals within the industries, in the industry, sorry. And more importantly, if individuals have been threatened or businesses have been threatened, to start publicly talking about this, because this is the only way that we are going to change the culture that has quite literally infected the Civil Aviation Safety Authority at many levels. And I also want to be able to make the comment very clearly that we firmly believe that there are many very, very good people that work within the Civil Aviation Safety Authority. And we hope that these broadcasts are not met with anger, but rather that they're met with a sense of opportunity, that by talking about these issues, that we can shed enough light on them, that we can finally start to deal with some of these wrongs and to set the industry on a course so that we can actually repair and we can regrow. And Ken, I know in speaking with you so often on issues that impact engineering businesses and maintenance businesses, the community wants the opportunity to succeed. It doesn't want to be at war with a safety regulator, and it doesn't really want to be wasting its time having to spend countless hours writing letters to various ministers and government officials. So I know that there is a real sense from the community that we would like to solve these problems. But right now, what's important is that we start to talk about them and we demonstrate to our political leaders that possibly they're not getting the truth. Possibly CASA are not actually being genuine or coming clean with the things that they are doing, or the things that their departments are doing, or people within their organisation are doing, that are creating such a negative impact. So thank you, gentlemen. It's probably enough of me chatting. I can already hear some of the guys on Auntie Prue and the rest of it saying, shut up, Morgan, and let's get on with the guests. So to kickstart the conversation this evening, I might direct the first question straight up to David. David, is CASA Incompetence undermining Australian industry, and did CASA Incompetence end up costing you your contracts?
Yes, it did. In fact, we've just become totally gutted by the whole situation. And really at this moment, I don't know where to turn. This has been going on for quite a few years. You can't put anything into CASA now. You don't know when it's going to be signed off. You don't know what sort of questions they're going to ask. So they're just, the people of a few years ago were very competent, very skilled, but that's just now totally gone. And they don't care about individuals either.
Wayne, obviously it's a fairly strong position to take, and the reason I'm addressing this question first of all is that in a moment we're going to start delving into exactly what this situation was, how it went so catastrophically wrong, what the costs of this process have been, and where that leaves Australian industry. Do you agree with David? Do you believe that CASA Incompetence is literally killing off industry?
Yes, I can fully attest to that. What we're seeing now is not what was put in place in 1998 when the legislation changed and we moved across to Part 21, and the systems and processes we put in place at that time. I was involved in some of the initial issues at that time frame. We developed a lot of appropriate systems. We had a lot of approvals out there. We had manufacturing organisations transitioning from the old rules and successfully moving into Part 21. And all I've seen in the last probably 5 years at least, an erosion of that. The issues and the systems we put in place were quite successful. We had a number of organisations coming up with innovative ideas, and Dasyl was one of them, of course. but now we just can't work. I can't, for the life of me, understand how far CASA's gone off song on this. It's just totally incomprehensible. And that's why I'm speaking up now.
Okay. Now be conscious of our time. We've got about an hour to an hour and a half maximum to try and get through some pretty complicated conversation. Ken, I was going to bounce the question to you, but I think I know the answer there, and you share that frustration. So let's start with in the beginning. All stories have a start. The start of this, David, is that your company recognised an opportunity to design and to manufacture an avionics component that would be installed in an aircraft that would communicate with the satellite phone system. And I think you've even got those boxes with you this evening, do you?
Yes, I do.
So maybe if you could give us a little bit of an overview of that opportunity as you saw it, and maybe share with our viewers, I guess, a look-see at the box, because quite a neat little box. I've had a bit to do with avionics over the years in and out of aircraft, and I have to say it's built to a very high standard. So, David, over to you.
Well, what I'd like to show you, it's part of an STC that I developed for a satellite phone system. It's one of my many STCs that I've had CASA approved over the period of time. And this was a component that we built. I'm just going to bring it up. It was actually built in the hangar. And this was part of an STC, so you could just build it up. The engineers could build it on the floor. And the issue was that with that sort of component, you couldn't swap it in between aircraft. So we then went to make an application to have that as a manufacturing part. So I'm just going to bring this up very slowly. My camera's not very good. But there you are. You can see that is the professional units. It's actually a fit, form and function of the one that's actually made in the hangar, apart from the front panel is a little bit thicker. And that marries up with another piece of equipment, which I hope that I have it the right way around. Yes, that goes in the aircraft.
And so, David, I'm just going to bounce in here a little bit. I'm going to play the devil advocate, because I know that many of the people that are going to be watching this are not necessarily engineers. I confess I'm not an engineer either, and I've been lucky. I was able to have a in-person briefing. The box that you've designed is designed to fit in a standard avionics installation port on an aircraft. It is a box that was fabricated using standard aircraft aluminium and electronic components, and it's designed to talk with that black box. The little grey boxes you were showing talk with the black box, which is I think it's a Sky Connect satellite phone control unit. And so it's an innovative little Aussie device. And I mean, there's so many Aussie innovations, isn't there, right across everything, but a great little aviation innovation from your company that provided a super cost-effective way for the airlines to have this satellite phone system talking on their airplanes. And I asked you the question today, obviously you saw this opportunity and you went after it, which is fantastic. And you basically did everything, and you got to a point where you were able to say, right, I think I can supply this box and I could supply it for a price. What was the price you were targeting that box to the customer for?
We're looking at a target price of about $2,500 US. So
about $2,500 for an airliner to install this little box into their aircraft.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, and obviously initially this box was approved as an STC. Could you maybe share with our viewers this evening what that meant?
Well, it meant that it was far more economical for me to build it in a factory type of environment rather than trying to build it on the hangar floor. It would cost the companies a lot more money to hand make it, because it was just handmade. This is machine made. It's all being built on a CNC machine. So it's going to be a lot more cost effective for the operators, different airlines, to be able to just put that into their standard panel. It was made for a Boeing, so put it into their panels neatly.
And David, in the course of manufacturing this, I imagine that it also created opportunity for other businesses around you. And one of those businesses is actually not far from our headquarters building at Bankstown Airport. How many businesses were involved in the overall supply chain?
I actually had a couple of businesses. We had a local, well, I can say their name, Go Air at Bankstown Airport. They actually made up all the CNC and the chassis and organised lots of bits and pieces. We brought in the hardware, and we had a local company down in Melbourne who made up the circuit boards. In fact, they're no longer in business because they've been run out by the people who are buying stuff from China much cheaper than they can make. So they're now out of business as well. We just had some other stuff imported.
So this box, designed here in Australia, manufactured at Bankstown Airport, very quickly you found interest from, it was at Air New Zealand and some other operators, and you found yourself in a position where this thing was taking off.
Yes, well, the people who were buying the STC wanted to have a device that they could move from aircraft to aircraft, and there was quite a fleet of they're a big fleet operator, and so they needed a device. And I could see, well, hang on a minute, this particular operator could use it, and other operators could use it, and it didn't really matter which airplane type they had. These were happened to be Boeing 737s, but it could be anything, 787, an Airbus, anybody that wanted this particular phone system, so it could go into any aircraft.
It's important to note at this point in time, and I know Wayne will probably bring this up a little bit later, that this is not a box that was critical to the safety of flight of any aircraft it was installed in, was it?
No, mate, that's correct. This was an STC box. The phone system, we need to put a bit of history behind this. The satellite phone system was developed in 2004, and the technology at that point was established. All the components, the system, the individual items within the box were already established. And in those days, in that particular issue of the STC, the components were mounted on the instrument panel of the 737. Now, the 737 was the launch aeroplane for this particular system that Dasyl intended to establish that as a lead airplane, a lead airframe, if you like. And then this box can go into any aircraft. It's not limited to the 737. It's just an interface box. And the issue was that the STC initially provided for the hangar people to actually manufacture the box, which they did, and that was the first box you saw David hold up. And this second box was meant to be an APMA part, which is plug and play compatible with those particular aircraft. And the APMA provided for a simple way of getting it into any aeroplane. That was the fundamental reason in developing it.
So we had the original product, David, that the first box you've manufactured, you got it approved through the CASA system as an STC. That enabled the box to be installed in an individual aeroplane. But one of the limitations of that STC process was that the operator of the aircraft simply couldn't remove it and fit it to a different aeroplane, could they?
No, that's correct, because the STC is actually per airframe. So whilst on that particular assigned airframe, that's fine. But if you want to move between different serial number aircraft, that becomes an issue. So that's where PMA parts, or APMA parts in our case, comes in real handy. You can move them around. You can pull them off for maintenance. You can put them back on again. So that's the restrictions with an STC part.
Okay, and this is the point. This is the nexus point where all things started to head towards disaster. And I think for the senators that would be watching this broadcast and our other politicians that are watching and government officials, it's important to just make a note here. And again, we understand you're not aviation professionals, but we've got a part that's been designed. The part gets an approval to be installed in an individual aeroplane. But of course, the airlines, the operators of these aircraft want to be able to take that part out of one aeroplane and put it into a different aeroplane. And there can be a whole bunch of serviceability needs and requirements for that. And so in order to achieve that outcome, the customers, obviously working with David and his team at Daysl Avionics, put a request in to say, could you work with your Australian regulator and have this part now taken from an STC and be given an APMA, an Australian Parts Manufacturing Authority, which then changes the nature of the part by paperwork and allows that part to then be installed in aircraft and used a little bit more broadly. And so this process is quite a well-proven process. And in fact, they do this in the United States every year. There are companies that are obviously requesting, I think in the US they're called a PMA approval, but obviously requesting these PMA approvals, and the regulator is set up to work with businesses to navigate this process. And so this is the start of where the real problem begins, at the moment in which Daysl Avionics are required to work with CASA to achieve an outcome. And so, David, the information you've shared with me over this past few weeks is that you originally went to CASA, you've met with CASA and discussed what you would like to do, but there was in fact a subtle difference between the boxes. You wanted to change a very minute detail on that box. And if I could get you to do me a favor and hold up the first box again, nice and still, what our viewers will see is that the front of this box has a fascia panel. It's an thin aluminium panel that's installed on the front of the box. We'll just wait for David to show it. Just bring it up a little bit, David. Just the first one, mate, the first panel. I want to see the thickness of that front fascia. So that front fascia, which has the buttons on it, is actually quite thin. Now, David, if you could hold up that second box for me. The second box has a fascia on it that's thick. And the reason it has a thicker fascia on it, you'll notice the buttons are a little bit more flush. And again, what we might do is we might take some photographs of these units and I'll attach them to the video feed in the comments later on so people can get a real sense of it. The reason it has a thicker front end on it is the operators of the aircraft didn't want a fascia with stickers. They wanted the lettering engraved, which makes it easier when the aircraft is cleaned and when maintenance is being performed, that the labels aren't destroyed. So this is a very simple process. There was absolutely no change to the electronics. There was no change to the internal workings of the unit. There was no change to the connectors. There was no change to the physical dimensions of the mounting system. There was no change, absolutely no change, except this fascia that has absolutely no bearing on any level of any safety critical function at all. Wayne, is that correct?
That's correct. There was no we deliberately went down this path to put the thicker faceplate on because it's better ergonomics for the pilots. The panel matches the equipment already in the aircraft, and the thicker faceplate by definition has to be stronger. So we thought, okay, we'll enhance this. Now, when you think about it, that's a safety issue. We've enhanced the safety of this product that goes into the aeroplane. The satellite telephone system is not a required system in the airplane, but it still has to meet the basic design rules for the aircraft, which it did, and it did in 2004, and it still does today. There's been no safety of flight issue, and there's been no problem with this system in operation. It's worked, and there's been never been a problem. But we deliberately took that path, and we were upfront with CASA and said, this is what we want to do. And unfortunately, the machinations within CASA, they could not understand that concept, and they still don't.
Okay, so we've got this simple process, and I can see when I say simple, I can almost see David's eyes rolling. David, you've gone to CASA with this change. You've got the support of individuals like Wayne and AMROBA and others to try and get this engineering solution completed. What were you told by CASA when you went to them to say, I want to change this from an STC to an APMA?
Initially, there wasn't a problem. Everyone was happy with the process, and I was requested to put the application in, which I did, though they said there was a bit of a lead time for them to get to see me. But I put that in and then waited. Then eventually they contacted me and they said, we'd like to come out and visit us and basically do what we thought was going to be called a conformity inspection. In other words, the box looked exactly the same as the drawings.
Okay, so CASA is saying that they could get this done for you. How long did they say that, or my understanding is if the manufacturing side is any different to maybe, Ken, what we would normally experience with engineering and maintenance and flight operations and training, CASA would give you an outline. They'd say to you, okay, we understand you need us to do something so you can export this product and you can create Australian jobs and you can create Australian industry and you can create Australian opportunity. For you to do those things, we need to do some paperwork for you. So we'll draft up an estimate and we'll tell you how much time we think that, well, this is CASA, how much time we think we're going to take up. And by the way, you can pay us for that time. How much time did they say it was going to take them to get this done for you? Your microphone there, David, you're just on mute.
12 hours, sorry, Ben. 12 hours is basically what the quote was for. which we thought was reasonable at the time because we knew it was only going to be a very short process. I mean, we had everything in place. All the paperwork was all completed. It was all ready to go. All they had to do is come out and inspect it and say, yep, this all looks the same as what you're showing, and go away and virtually rubber stamp it.
Okay,
So,
now Wayne, I'm going to jump in there. Wayne, you have 20-year veteran working for CASA. You were a maintenance inspector. You obviously, in your career, would have dealt with these types of applications. Was the CASA response unreasonable?
For the 12 hours, no. But for what turned out to be the eventual time frame was totally unreasonable.
Well, we're going to get to that. That we're building a little bit of suspense here for our senators that are watching. We're building to a crescendo because where we're going with this should leave everybody with their jaws around their knees. I'm going to come back to David. So you've received an estimate from CASA, the preeminent safety regulator here in Australia. What I think, Ken, according to CASA, the 6th best aviation regulator in the world. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The issue that concerns this is when Part 21 was brought in 98, it had ministerial and CASA support to try and assist the industry to develop products and to open up the trade markets around the world, so Australian manufacturing with these products can get recognition by other government regulators and can be then sold into other countries, and so that industry in Australia could create
so David,
jobs.
without being able to take this part from an STC and move it into an APMA approved part, what would it mean if you were not able to do it?
Well, it's just a dead duck because basically unless you can sell somebody an STC, which is individual aeroplanes, you can't do anything with it. It's basically you can't. It's tied to that STC. So once you get a PMA part, you can actually unlock it. You've got to have an STC initially, which you could tie it to, but then from then on, you could sell it on the open market. If somebody else had a Bonanza, for example, and wanted to put one of these phones in, and they like this little panel, they could go along and put it in. They'd have the local engineering cover it, and that's it. It was a simple process. So it's just like us buying equipment from the US. You see something on that you'd like to buy and put in your airplane, and you say, "Big, I'll order it," and you just get some local engineering to cover it here.
So, David, you receive the estimate. CASA tells you need to pay them for their service to provide this function, which is to approve this part. Take us through, first of all, how long from start to finish did it take CASA to finally approve this part?
Well, we got the go-ahead in July, the end of July, and we didn't get the final sign-off, the tick in the box, until a couple of days before Christmas.
So how many months or years did that take?
Well, that was about 5 months.
Okay.
That was the start. It continued on after that, but it was 5 months to have this unit approved with a slight change from the original STC design.
Wayne, back to you. I mean, is 5 months a reasonable time frame for this, what effectively should have been a relatively simple paperwork exercise?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, that was so far over the top, I couldn't believe it. That box should have taken, probably, if I had been involved in it when I was working with CASA, it probably would have taken a week because, and there's a very simple reason, all the safety issues had been identified and put in place and were effective from 2004. At the point when the application went in, we had something like 14 or 15 years of safe operation. So that didn't require any assessment. All it required was a comparison of that box to the original box to see that it's plug and play compatible, which is what we did, was to try and get that right from day one, that this would be plug and play, and that was the concept behind it, and to improve it if we could, because as I said, it's better ergonomically for the flight crews. And putting in a thicker faceplate only made the front support structure stronger. So we didn't see any problems. And to have this dragged out the way it dragged out over all that time wasn't generating, it was just a total waste of time. And I think all I did was generate work for CASA people.
So Wayne, obviously you worked inside of the regulator. You've got a direct hand of experience in these types of activities. How many people would typically be involved in this type of activity on CASA's side? So you come to them with a case like this. How many people would you estimate it would need from CASA to satisfy this process?
Oh, it should have only taken 2 people. It should have the system was put in place in 2000 when this all put in. It would require 1 manufacturing inspector to ensure that the part was actually made to the design. A conformity inspection, which Dave mentioned a minute ago, should have been done. A conformity inspection should have been made. That verifies that the box is what the design says it is. And then the comparison of the design, which an engineer would get involved with, because don't forget an APMA is a two standalone 2-part process, manufacturing and design. They have to go together. And at the end of the day, you get the approval, but the 2 of them have to work in conjunction. So it's important that the conformity be done first to show, yes, the box is what the design says. And then the design gets assessed to make sure that, yes, it complies with the design rules. And all of that was already established and already done. This box had already been in, and we were lucky at the time, or so Dave was lucky at the time, he already had a couple of years of experience of the thing being fabricated in the hangar. So it wasn't as though we were reinventing anything that wasn't already a proven product. Now that means we didn't have to do.
Okay, I'm going to bounce across to David. So Wayne, 20 years of experience working inside the regulator. A couple of people should be involved in this process. Exactly how many people in CASA were involved in this process for what eventuated across this 5 months?
Well, actually, the total of 9 people.
9 people.
And 9 people. And we had to have, there was one meeting at my premises. We had, Wayne and I, in fact, had to go to Canberra at one stage, where there was actually 3 or 4 people. I can't remember right at the top. Wayne might correct me. And then we had 2 people on the phone, on a video link as well, just at that one meeting. And at no stage anywhere in the process did CASA ever look at the unit, picked it up, apart from one of the members of the stakeholders group. We actually even had to get them involved to try and get this project moving.
Ken, you're sitting there. I cannot, Ken, I've been around you long enough that I can almost read your mind. And I know you're just sitting there thinking to yourself, how do 9 people get themselves involved in this effort? I mean, your members for AMROBA are maintenance, repair, overhaul businesses, MROs. Are these types of experiences being experienced across the maintenance and engineering side? Are we seeing generally that decisions and actions by CASA are tending to just involve more people than necessary?
I think it's a conceptual thing that goes right across the system nowadays. There's some excellent people within CASA that you deal with from time to time in a regional office, but some of the red tape that the people behind the scenes create and the concepts they put into now, we've moved away from the trying to adopt the simplicity of the US system, which was a big policy area that the minister supported back in the late 90s. The idea was to bring that in because it simplified the system, and it was to help the industry to get recognition into the Pacific area, mainly through the United States. Now, one of the issues that system had, that clearly recognises the responsibility of the industry to produce the detail and to do the tests and the reports so that they can pass that through to CASA, and it should all then simplify the process for the CASA delegate to verify that an industry person that's been delegated with responsibilities. David say he's got a responsibility under CASA Part 21. Underneath subpart AM, he is an authorised person assigned for design data, and you've got that sort of capability built within his own company. So with this technology out there and the simplicity of what the system is and the simplicity of what the change was, it's impossible to understand why a regulator is now creating red tape and more red tape instead of being, they're not the regulator in this particular point, where CASA's role in this particular role is to be assistance to the industry to create the manufacturing approvals to allow the industry and the growth in this country. If you put all these restrictions, David just said it there, and I was saying that, you've got a customer comes to David and says, I need this repair or whatever, I want this part made, and I need to have it on my aircraft in 2 months' time. And that should, you go to CASA and you say, the client wants the product then CASA should work with David to expedite the item, make sure it's there, and make sure the approval's in place, so the customer out there, like some airline that knows they can get the part on those days and fit the items up, so the system will work. We're there to support an industry, especially from the manufacturing side, and CASA should be working to the time frames to help and meet what the customer wants.
I'm going to jump in here, Ken. I'm going to fire it back across to Wayne. I mean, you know, Ken's saying makes sense there, Wayne. I mean, is this a case? I mean, 9 people working on this. You're saying to me, with 2 decades of experience working inside of CASA, that this is a job for 2 people. How did it evolve that 9 people at CASA were involved in this process?
I'm speechless. I do not understand how that can possibly be. The whole concept of this part and the technology and the philosophies behind this particular part that we built are so simple. I mean, this is not. We're not building some hugely risky item to go onto an aircraft. It's a simple, very simple process. Anybody with the technical ability would recognise it for what it is. It's not. It's only switches, enunciated things, some interwiring, which is standard aircraft interwiring, standard connectors, goes into the P9 panel on the Boeing. Simple. It is not rocket science. It is, and that's what frustrates me. I can't think of why we needed to have 9 people. Now, that's only our estimate of the people we were corresponding with. So we believe it was 9. There could be more behind the scenes.
Could be more.
And there may be some good people behind the scenes who were saying that what you're doing is wrong, but we don't know. But the issue is that should not have been that complex, because, as I said, we had the safe history. That we weren't reinventing wheels. We had the safe history, and that's the. We often
wonder, and I know that I have personally made this statement to the Senate, that the industry wonders where the money goes. How does CASA not manage the industry when so much money is allocated to that organisation from the Australian taxpayer, and that we discover on something as simple as this, David, that suddenly, instead of 2 people being involved, it's got 9 people. Well, I guess we begin to have an insight into where CASA's budget's being consumed, and it's a frightening insight indeed. Obviously, 9 people involved. You're originally told it's going to take a mere number of weeks. It now takes 5 months. Obviously, through this process, you would have got to a point where things weren't adding up and you were realising that this process was going sideways. What avenues were available to you to try and bring the delays to an end and to try and corral this to a positive outcome, even though it was running catastrophically over budget on time?
Well, Ben, we actually had to involve the stakeholder group, because it wasn't going anywhere. CASA was saying, well, we have to create the part as a manufacturing part and put it into the STC. It does go into the STC, but it's only listed as a part item. It's totally separate. So then we had to organise and make applications for putting into an STC, and it was just getting so ludicrous. We had to involve somebody else. So that's where the stakeholder group came in, and they did do some mediation. In fact, the stakeholder group, the member there was the only person within CASA who actually physically holds the box.
I'm going to jump in here, David, because I think it's actually a really important point, in that you're saying the stakeholder group, but for the senators and the MPs and the other government officials that are going to be watching this video, and they are watching this video, and just as we're talking, I've received, you've probably seen me look down, I've been receiving text messages from several senators saying that this situation is just incredible. You say you're engaging with the stakeholder group. Who exactly is that?
Well, we engaged with a gentleman called Andreas at the time, and it was part of the CASA organisation to help mediate when you're going to have difficulty with different people. And so they had to try and mediate with whoever was operating in the background to try and get this through. And they would just pass, I'd email them, and they'd email whoever they're going to talk to, and they'd come back to them and say, "I know we want David to do this and David to do that," and we'd go away and we'd have a look, and some of the stuff was actually stupid, some of it we'd respond to, but it came to a ludicrous point at the end that the part was no longer my part. It became a CASA part, and so I actually created two files. We have one is called the CASA part, and one is called the Dasyl part. The Dasyl part was the part we built. The CASA part was the imaginary part that they kept on going about. And the first inspector that came out to see us, in fact, told us when he came to see us, "I'm not an avionics person. This part was an avionics part." He had no experience at avionics. So it seems to be that once the CASA personnel takes a position, the rest of CASA stands behind them. So it doesn't matter what you say and what you do. There's no such thing as, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake," or "Look, I'll look into it. I might not be quite correct here," or "I'll get somebody else in to give a helping hand," or "I'll transfer you to somebody else." They'll make a statement and they'll just they'll go on continually, and they'll just keep working and working, and basically they try to break you. And at the end of the day, I was coming to the point that, you know, we had to keep surviving. We had to sell a property. We in fact ended up selling 2 properties. We had to do workarounds with our clients to keep them going, keeping in mind, you know, sitting a Boeing on the ground. You can see it now with COVID. You know, Qantas is bleeding money. The operators are bleeding money because they need to get this thing flying. So here I am trying to work in the background. So not only do I have the pressure of CASA, putting us in an unsafe condition, because when you're starting to work under a tight schedule, putting great pressure onto you, you know, it's not a healthy situation. And here we are, have a regulator that's supposed to be safe, you know, making us work safe, and they're the ones putting the safety concerns in. So it just kept on going. They just came up with more and more stuff. You would answer one question, they'll come up with another question. And they kept on saying to us, "Well, it's not an identical part." It's not an identical part. But and then they talk about the measurements were different. The front panel was different. We changed it from a 63 thousandth of an inch front panel to 0.25 thousandth of an inch front panel. They said, "Oh, that's a big difference." But the overall dimensions of the box never changed from the STC part to the PMA part. There was no difference apart from that part that makes it look nice. And that was the only change. But they just kept on going and going and going. They wouldn't stop.
Wayne, I can sense the frustration, David, in your voice there. And I know it's more than frustration. I know that there is an absolute bit of disappointment that this whole process in the end cost you that contract with the airlines. And in effectively doing so, it didn't just cost you a contract, it cost the businesses that were supporting the manufacture of that the opportunity for work. It cost the nation an opportunity to be recognised as an innovator and product manufacturer and deliverer. And of course, it's cost you enormously in a personal sense, because you've had to keep that business running whilst facing this ridiculous delay by people who, and this is the important thing that I would ask the viewers and those that have been following this. The CASA staff members can be as incompetent as you can imagine, but they still get paid. These people can be devoid of the necessary skill sets to do the job properly, and they get paid. You as industry, we as industry, can find the process incredibly frustrating and do our damnedest to navigate it, facing extensive delays, watching our contracts get torn up, and they still get paid. There is no consequence for these people. There is no accountability for their inaction and their incompetence and the economic costs that are inflicted as a consequence of that. And it is so important that this be recognised. And I hope that our senators and MPs and government officials that are watching, and I hope that the broader industry that are watching really allow that to sink in, that we've been watching the systematic destruction of Australian manufacturing in the aviation and aerospace sectors, largely because of a regulatory system and an approach by a regulator which appears to be entirely devoid of performance outcome. And we hear CASA speak quite, almost cringe when I hear them speak about performance-based regulation and performance outcome. Where's their performance? When do we arrive at a moment in time where they actually deliver? And Wayne, you and I have had this really engaging conversation around the concept that when you go to CASA and you say to them, we're going to need something from you, and they say to you, well, you have to pay us for us to provide you the regulatory services that, by the way, the Australian taxpayer is giving us $200 million to do, but we want you to pay again, because what we want to do is we want to use our budget for other things. We're still wondering what largely that is, but we want to use that budget up. And so you as Australian industry, your cost and consequence for creating opportunities for the broader Australian economy, the consequence of you creating jobs, the consequence of you innovating and trying to take the nation forward is you're going to have to pay us, the government, so we can do something for you, so you can make that happen for us, so we can collect higher taxes and higher revenues and make the country, work and succeed. You go to CASA, they issue you with a quotation, they ask you to pay money. Wayne, they've formed a contract with you, haven't they?
That's right, Ben. Let's step back a bit. We brought this all up with the Industry Complaints Commissioner, and we made that point to him, and he completely refuted it. It's crazy. It was specified back when the legislation changed that there would be such a thing as a regulatory service. Now, I've always struggled with that. I don't know what a regulatory service really is. We had to deal with it at the time, and we did. But the issue is that these people do get paid, and they're not providing the service. The delays that were provided today, or foisted upon David, could nowhere be seen to be a regulatory service. If you tell somebody we will deliver the approval to you on, the first instance we had was the 31st of August, and then miss that by another 90 days, and then miss it again, how can that be a service? I mean, it beggars belief that CASA can actually do that. And as it turned out, we found out from the Regulatory Service Division, which is, by the way, the only place you can go. You apply to the Regulatory Service Division, and they come back and tell you, yeah, we'll deliver at this date. That's not the full story. The full story is there's always a caveat on that. Once we are satisfied with the process, which means that there is it's open-ended how many questions they can ask. And they just keep asking this question, that question, and a lot of it is just nonsense. It's only designed to keep them in business. And if you look at
it amplifies, Wayne, I'll cut in there. It amplifies the fact that for the staff members at CASA that get involved in these processes, and I'll again just reiterate that there are good people who work inside of CASA, and I really genuinely feel sorry for them because they're working inside of an organisation where, unfortunately there's a tarring with the same brush going on in many respects, and that is rightfully so, unfortunately. But there's many people that really probably are trying to do the right thing, and they're dealing with either people or systems or processes which are letting them down enormously. But, what strikes my mind with this is they can fail so catastrophically to deliver something in a reasonable time frame. And David, for you and your family and for your staff and business, the direct result was it's cost you the contract. You've now lost that contract. And I asked you the question today, and in fact, it was a really interesting question because I said to you, if you take into consideration all these costs and expenses that you've now borne as a result of this mess, if you were to sell the box to a customer, how much would you need to sell you said to us before you were aiming to deliver these for around about 2,000 US. How much now would you need to sell the box for in order to amortize CASA's involvement in this process? So to go from a anticipated delivery of $2,000 a box, a highly innovative, cost-effective solution that airlines and aircraft owners would jump at, to a box that suddenly is now going to cost $20,000 for someone to install. What has that done to you, to your company, in terms of being able to compete with American avionics innovators and European avionics innovators?
You can't. But not only that, CASA has not moved forward with other regulators, particularly with the FAA, that they don't automatically accept our parts. So that's another issue. And the same with STCs. I mean, we accept anything that's made by under an FAA authorization, whether it be an STC or a PMA part or whatever, a TSO part. But there's no reciprocal agreement. You know, we've only got an agreement here, basically with New Zealand and a few others, that they accept our bits and pieces. So it's really become a very restrictive market. There's no help, and CASA don't care. You know, you talk to them about it, and they just, oh well, you know, this is going to happen. It'll move on, and we'll do something about it. But nothing does happen. It's just you get to the point now. It's just all talk, and so you really can't plan any manufacturing. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I can't manufacture anything more in Australia, and I cannot produce any more STCs, even though I've done 20 STCs on different airframes, and most of them, like we did a full EFIS cockpit. We took an analog EFIS Boeing, and we put a complete EFIS system with TORs and all sorts of things in it, and it was dispatching out of Australia for quite some time with 94% the aircraft reliability, and it's now gone to the US, but even that's difficult to try and get the Americans to accept this STC on board the aircraft. But just
on that point, David, and I think it's actually a really important point. I mean, my understanding is, and I have to apologise, and I often say this all the time, I'm not the smartest person on the regulations. I've never professed to be a PhD holder in the books, in CASA's part regulations. I've always said that I just try to come to things with an open mind, and I try to look at it from a perspective of, does this make sense? Does this look like we are doing this from a perspective of it being simple and accessible and affordable? So, my understanding is that one of the underpinnings of this Part 21 regulation, I hope I've got the right one, was that there's supposed to be full bilateral recognition, so that if there's an STC developed in Australia, that CASA does all the paperwork that's necessary in order to ensure that STC is promulgated, so that countries like the United States and Europe and whatnot will have access to that. And that's very important for an Australian manufacturer, because what that is if you've taken the time to innovate, design, manufacture and produce a component, that is immediately then available to other nations, so that you have the opportunity to export. And I would have thought that this is something that we would be aspiring to. And when I hear Michael McCormack, plenty of opportunities to listen to Michael McCormack talk about how important jobs are and opportunity is, and yet Minister responsible for aviation, has CASA done this? Has CASA actually completed these bilateral agreements, and is Australian industry being afforded the opportunity, Wayne?
No, they haven't, and that's one of the biggest issues we've got. We readily accept let's stick at that. This is a PMA, an APMA part. That's an equivalent to the American PMA part. We can't do what they do under that approval system. They don't accept our STCs. Every one of them that goes over there ends up being scrutinised in some fashion. And the issue is that, as Dave alluded to, there's an aeroplane over there now that's got an extensive Daysl STC. The aeroplane had fantastic dispatch reliability, and it's now being re-engineered over there. David had to send all the information and data across, re-engineered over there by a designated engineering representative of FAA to get the thing in the thing. That should have an automatic acceptance. We accept an aeroplane from the US, Boeing, whatever it happens to be, any aeroplane. It may have FAA STCs, or might even have Canadian STCs or New Zealand STCs. We automatically accept it because they're responsible authorities, and they're held in high repute. I'm not sure that CASA now is held in high repute, and I got a suspicion when you talk to people outside the industry and with other regulators, and David's done that, that the reputation of CASA is going down the tubes at a huge rate. And that's important, because we need to have a regulator. We need to have a safety regulator. we've got an ICAO requirement on us that we have an effective regulator. At the moment, we don't, and I believe that some of the actions of CASA are actually a safety issue when you stitch back in and look back down into the the nitty-gritties behind what they're doing. Look at the real issues, and you'll find that there'll be a safety issue.
Well, it's a pretty powerful comment there, Wayne, that you're saying that, here in Australia, we automatically accept FAA STCs.
Yes.
And I know pretty much right across the board, just about everything that the FAA issues, we accept.
Yes.
I find it really odd that we as a nation have not achieved, the reverse side of this to ensure that what we're doing in this country is automatically accepted. And I can only assume, and maybe what Wayne is saying is correct, that the FAA and other leading aviation nations are possibly looking at the processes that CASA use and question and probably have a significant amount of doubt before they're prepared to accept things. Is this true?
Yeah, I think one of the major problems we've got, we went down a line, we've had the bilateral aviation safety agreement with America amended just a couple of years back. That took a bit of lobbying from the industry as well as CASA. The system that's got built within that system is we recognise the FAA approved parts for STCs automatically, but for any Australian thing that goes into transport aircraft, CASA has to actually submit the Australian STC to the FAA for recognition. Now, we've had some of those recognised. In a couple of the cases, we found on one was to do with the noise situation. CASA's not responsible for the noise certification of a product, and I'm talking about noise for things like rotor blades and propeller blades and aircraft noise itself. So they required one of the Australian STCs that has been recognised, then we go through a full noise certification part to get the Australian STC. And we're supposed to have adopted Part 21 from the FARs, and you have the American system, its processes, its procedures, but when the regulator itself is not approved in Australia to approve the actual noise certification on an aircraft or product, then it actually puts additional costs on an Australian person to do it. But CASA's got to be convinced to take your STC to the FAA to get the FAA to recognise your STC. And there's great benefits. This is where the industry benefits. They get an FAA STC based on the Australian one, then it opens up the markets in America, and the FAA STC is more acceptable worldwide. I don't think many countries actually accept an Australian STC. So that's where we need the FAA system. We need to be able to get the bilateral, and we need those approvals, and we need a better negotiation in relation to the implementation procedures to run with that. So industry in Australia.
What I find, Ken, I'm going to jump in again. What I find odd with this, and I'm going to I'll put this out to everybody. Obviously, I've been at the centre of a lot of discussion across the industry on the fact that there really is a need for the Australian government to get serious about looking at adopting, not harmonising, because I think that's another furphy. That's almost another con job that's been pulled on ministers and the Australian government, with CASA saying, "Oh, we'll harmonise," but they never really harmonise. They Frankenstein and they bastardise. They end up with like a Franken regulation that in no way reflects what the actual US regulation is. But there is really a need for Australia to have a sit-up, wake-up moment and say, what the hell are we doing? If we accept, and this is the quintessential argument that I've never had a single person at CASA ever able to answer in any manner that you could accept as an acceptable response. But if we accept US STCs and we accept US PMA and we don't question it, why the hell do we have such a convoluted Australian approach to approving an STC and a PMA? Why are we simply not using the US process, which by approving those STCs and PMAs, we're already saying they're safe? Why do we have to have a process, and I'll shoot it to Wayne first, why have we got to have a process that's so uniquely Australian and disadvantaging Australian industry so significantly?
Well, initially, Ben, when it was first, and it's still on the regulation. If you look at Part 21, the intent of the regulation is still there, and that is to harmonise. And I found it an easy thing to do. There was no major issues with looking at the way FAA did it and just approving it, just running the process. It's not rocket science. The design, we follow the FAA design rules. The Part 23, the Part 25, 27, 29 design rules for aircraft and bits and pieces, we follow them. And it goes into the system. I've dealt with the large manufacturers here doing bilateral projects for what used to be Hawker de Havilland years ago on some of their major Boeing projects, and they accepted our conformity inspection. I was actually working for FAA doing the conformity inspection through the CASA system, and there was no issues. It all happened. It just requires a little bit of thought and to look at the real situation. I don't believe there's any issue. There was always comment about, oh well, we've got a common law system and they've got a statute law system, but it doesn't matter. We're not talking about law. We're talking about design rules. The design rule is the safety rule. And you look at Part 23, and there's a term that the industry people use. They're all blood rules. Everything in that rule was there to stop a safety problem, and that's what we worked to. There was no issues. We've accepted it. We also accept the JAR and the EASA rules, which are basically the FARs turned into other rules. So it's not as though we're on a different page. We are on the same page as the FAA, and we can work with them. The problem we've got is we've got people within CASA who absolutely do not understand that fundamental. And I think,
Wayne, one of the things that I'll jump in here. One of the things that's obviously frustrating with this is when we do have the opportunity for the Australian government to question the CASA leadership, and obviously the Senate RRAT provides a vital function there in bringing these people before the government and throwing those questions at them and expecting an answer, and quite often never getting an answer. But Shane Carmody is the DAS, and obviously there's going to be a fairly wide opinion on Shane's performance as DAS, and I've frankly got mine. I mean, this is a DAS that sat before an Australian inquiry and blatantly lied. He lied to the government and tried to present an argument to the government that I and AOPA had signed off on regulation in this country that we contest as being horrible for the country. And he tried his damnedest to convince the Senate that I had signed off on that regulation, and he had that bit of paper. Senators, Mr. Morgan is cherry picking, only to be caught out. He was caught right out. Absolutely caught out. A dishonest response. And of course, that response was recanted. And Mr. Carmody stated that he didn't lie, he misspoke. But I think the ordinary interpretation is when you say one thing, it's not true. Well, it is what it is. He's also been very clear in saying to the senators that he trusts his experts. He trusts his experts. I'd have to argue in this particular case that the people who've been assigned to undertake the approvals process, are they not the experts? And if in fact they are the experts, Wayne, what kind of advice is the DAS getting?
I couldn't believe it that a CEO of a government authority sat in front of the Senate Estimates Committee and made a statement that says, I rely on my experts. When I saw that, I nearly fell off my chair. That is a totally dumb thing to say. We've only got to look at the performance of government departments around Australia during the COVID problems. We got Ruby Princess. We got the lockdown housing complex in Melbourne. We've got the aged care facilities, all run by government experts in departments. Enough said, I think.
Some interesting comments coming in as well. I don't think there's too many people that are that unhappy with his departure from CASA, and obviously we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on in the program. David, I'll come to you. Same set of questions to you, really. If we're simply adopting, or if we're accepting of the US system, and we say that the US STC processes are sufficient, that CASA automatically accepts them, why would you ever work with CASA in this country? Why would you not simply be taking your work to the US and having your processes managed by a professional regulator there?
Well, actually, I was given an opportunity to move to the US some years ago, and I didn't want to go because I loved Australia. But in hindsight, I should have moved to the States and had my STCs and PMAs done there, and I know they would have been done in a timely manner. It just would have been a no-brainer. In fact, I've helped the Australian companies here, and one major company has now moved all its operations. It's produced a TSO part and decided it was dealing with CASA here was just unworkable, and they just moved to the US. I mean, another case is when you look at it, is that we invented the black box recorder, the flight data recorder, an Australian invention. Well, I know a company that's based in Australia that designed a very smart, in fact, I've installed one fairly recently, a smart flight data recorder. It's tiny, it will survive any sort of crash. But where they move their operation for manufacturing? To the US. There isn't anybody making things here. I mean, you'd be an idiot to try to build anything in Australia now. It's just gone. During my whole process here with this APMA debacle, I was starting to I was starting to think, well, hang on, my processes are not right. Am I sort of off the beaten track? And so I actually contacted the FAA, and the FAA gave me what we were doing was correct. But they don't understand our system. So if they don't understand, they said, well, we don't understand either. And that's where CASA, I think, hides behind a great convoluted system of, pre-1998 and post-1998, and the system is just not workable.
So the process went catastrophically wrong. The timeline blew out just enormously. It resulted in you losing the contract because the customer just simply couldn't continue waiting on the never never. You were not able to give the customer any defined timeline because CASA were just not able to really provide a timeline that they could meet. And there was no confidence that they're even going to meet that timeline. Obviously, you sought to raise this with the stakeholder group, and that stakeholder group at the time was led by Rob Walker. But you didn't get an opportunity to meet with Rob directly. You were asked to meet with a subordinate. Did you try to organise a meeting with the DAS himself to raise these concerns at the highest level to have it dealt with?
Yes. Well, when we actually wrote a letter, in fact, the conversations went on for quite a while. We had a meeting with the ICC, and we raised it with him. We wanted to actually address the board and address the CEO. And we asked it on several occasions, and basically we didn't get any response. It appeared that nobody really cared.
So you received no opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with the DAS. There was no offer to meet maybe with some additional parties. There was absolutely no engagement whatsoever with respect to trying to understand the problem that was being generated.
No, that is correct.
And you did communicate. I just want to be clear that you did communicate that you were risking the loss of the contract. It would result in obviously this whole thing turning pear-shaped, but there was no consideration whatsoever for the urgency of trying to resolve these issues.
No, there didn't seem to be any care at all. They just kept on coming back with the boards with more and more requests. I mean, we didn't go to the ICC until the whole project was finished, because we needed to go through. We thought we'd go through a process where we could, get something resolved for the industry, and it just didn't go anywhere. We asked the ICC to have an independent look and get independent people to go through it, other than people within CASA, but that didn't happen. He just went back to the same people because the way the letter.
Well, David, I want to come to the ICC in a moment, but just before we jump to that, obviously your request also was a request to the board. Did any board member, board chair or representative of the board make contact with you and provide you with an opportunity to meet to discuss what was going on and seek to understand how 9+ CASA staff members could possibly be involved in this catastrophic debacle?
No, nobody contacted us at all. Nobody appeared to be interested.
So no interest at all. Now, of course, you've just mentioned you took this to the Independent Complaints Commissioner, and I feel sorry for Jonathan Hanton, because Jonathan, it seems to be becoming a regular mention on this broadcast that we're doing weekly, that so many of us so many of the guests that we've invited on, and you know, I was asked the other day, a politician called me up and said, exactly how many of these broadcasts are you intending on doing, Ben? And I said to him, well, I've had enough people reach out that if we do a program once a week, we'll be at it for the next 5 years. We have more material than we can possibly handle, which is absolutely staggering that there are so many people with so many problems in doing business with our safety regulator, especially when you consider that this is the same safety regulator that produced a customer satisfaction survey not long ago. See the eyes move there, Ken? A customer satisfaction survey that somehow claimed they were doing a damn good job. Like, really? So you've gone to Jonathan. Jonathan is the Independent Complaints Commissioner that's paid by CASA, reports to the CASA board and reports to the CASA CEO, if I've got that correct. Is that right, Ken?
That's correct. His role is to the board, and he's the person that's supposed to take the complaints and make his report to the board to give the answers to what the problems are.
Well, Ken, how independent? How independent is the Complaints Commissioner if he works for the very people and is paid by the very people that he's taking complaints on? How independent is that?
I don't see him independent. He's sitting in the same office space as some of the management of CASA. His replies, when you read them, virtually repeat the directions that are going from the actual the sections of CASA. It's almost the same words he uses. He sends back to the industry, and those words match up exactly what the other parts of the CASA. It's almost
Ken,
like
is
a
it your
defensive
experience? I'm going to cut you off again, I'm not trying to be rude, Ken. I'm cognizant of the time, and I want to hit a few questions before I move on. Does the Independent Complaints Commissioner take any advice from the internal CASA legal team?
Oh, I think so. I think for sure he sits next door to him. So, but the thing is, his answers aren't based on what I would see an independent. If someone who wasn't associated within the building, he was separate from that. He should be over in the Department of Infrastructure or somewhere where he can take a proper independent review of it, and then he can actually go back and it looks more clean and more honest to the industry. Someone situated within CASA and in their own building, very hard to say that he's not biased by the people in there.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, again, I'm not the smartest guy in the room here, Ken, but an Independent Complaints Commissioner that works for the very organisation that he's purportedly an Independent Complaints Commissioner for. In other words, you can go to this guy, you can have a conversation with him, you can make disclosures to him that he is independent from the very people that you are making allegations about, and potentially those allegations may even have a criminal aspect. This guy's working for CASA and he's paid for by CASA. Is that not like going to Jack the Ripper and asking Jack the Ripper to in fact be the person to perform the autopsy on the victim?
Well, you could probably put it that way. When they first had this independent person, he was actually reported to the CEO of CASA after the complaints out of that last review. He got shifted, and he should be linked up into the Department of Infrastructure, the portfolio department, and they should review it from that area. And that would, from the industry point of view, would see somebody that's more independent from the regulator, and he could report back to the board, but he should be located with the portfolio department of the government.
I'd like to issue a challenge to the industry for those of our members and industry supporters that are currently watching this broadcast. And I know that there will be thousands that will view this after the broadcast. Not everyone gets to tune in and watch this live. By comparison, David and Wayne, the broadcast that we did with Glenn Buckley was connected to over 80,000 people on social media and received over 20,000, I think close to 20,000 views. And it will obviously continue to grow as time goes on. And as one of the comments so far this evening is that this is in fact a great public record and the material is here to stay. In other words, it will be viewed time and time again as necessary. Obviously, in dealing with this independent complaints commissioner, what I would like to know from members and industry is, do we have any examples where the independent complaints commissioner has actually provided an outcome that's in support of the person who lodged the complaint? I'd like to see that. I'd like to see if the ICC has produced so much as one recommendation that's supported industry and a person who's come forward saying that the way that they've been dealt with or the process that was applied was wrong. And for those watching, if you've got such an example, I'd welcome you to contact me. And if you've also got examples where you've made complaints and you've been dismissed, reach out and make contact. I'd like to add you to our growing list of program participants, because I think our government, our senators and our members of parliament need to see more of what's been going on. So, David, back to you. The Complaints Commissioner was provided all of the information from you and your team. What response did you get?
Well, not much initially. It took quite a while for them to come back, and they wrote a preliminary report, and some of the wording in the preliminary report lined up with the people that had actually made the original comments. So basically it became a bit of a whitewash. It was just repeating back what was already said. So he went back to the same people that had caused the problem because he got the same answer. So really, at the end of the day, the whole thing with the independent commissioner is not, we're naive. I was very naive at the time. I thought it was independent, but I found out really out of this, it's not independent at all. It's just a total waste of time. And then, of course, once you start bringing that up, then you get payback. So then I suffered payback the next year.
That's obviously a very important topic. I know you have mentioned this to me and you've said, Ben, I've actually been threatened by CASA through this process. Would you be able to share with our viewers those threats?
Well, I actually had a threat by a CASA person during the APMA, the STC process. And in fact, what they wanted me to do is to look at it this way. The STC has revisions, like all documents. You revise them and you issue them and you find different things and you change them up. Well, this particular officer wanted me to set the whole system back to revision 0. And I said, no, I wouldn't do that. And he wanted me, he said, well, the whole STC that I had wasn't suitable, and he wanted me to rewrite the whole thing. So this is in 2017, and the STC had been around for 2004. And he basically started to threaten me. So, you know, if I wasn't going to do that, I wasn't going to get anywhere. And so, you know, that became a bit of an issue for me. And I just didn't like it.
David, what do you mean you weren't going to get anywhere? I know I'm going to press that point a little bit, but I mean, obviously, it's something that I hear. It's a recurring theme. And I've said this. I have said this in front of a Senate inquiry. I've said there is something drastically wrong. I'll try and paraphrase as best as I can. There is something drastically wrong with the way in which the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in this country is regulating and managing this industry. And there are things going on that shouldn't be going on. And I know that I've been approached by a significant number of people who over the last 20 years have had all manner of threats made to them. And I also hear on regular occurrence people saying to me, Ben, I would love to speak up and publicly talk about the things that I've experienced, but I'm worried because I know how vindictive and how nasty these people can be. Not all the CASA, and I say this again, I'm going to keep stressing this, not all CASA people are involved in this type of behaviour, repugnant behaviour. But there are some that are engaged in that level of behaviour. So I do hear it. It's a recurring theme. And so I'm not surprised that you would bring that up. But what were you led to believe might happen to you if you continued to push your point?
Well, I had to do the STC their way. So I had to go, they wanted me to go back and start from ground 0 and rework the whole thing through again. If I wasn't going to do it their way, well, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And at that point, this is where I discussed the matter with Wayne, and we started to get the stakeholder group involved because we knew that we weren't going to go anywhere. And why should we rewrite an STC that's out in the market? What about all the aeroplanes that are flying around? You know, what do you do with them? You know, you got the airworthiness issues, all sorts of things. And these are issues that this particular officer didn't even understand. And he's supposed to have experience with Boeing airplanes. So, you know, you just can't do that. But to be, you know, pushed to that point, Well, we had no opportunity. Either going to shut the whole program down, and I'd have to go back to my client and say, no, can do, or we just push on. Because then you've invested a lot of money into it, so you just say, well, let's push on. We can't, you know. So that's where we got the stakeholders group involved. Eventually, we did come out of it, but I mean, just for a small project, heavens above, you start a big project. Imagine if you had to start something from the beginning. You know, we had a product that's already available, it was already CASA approved. We even had circuit boards that they questioned that have been in many SDCs as a standard part, and they wouldn't even accept that in this. So it was just mind-boggling, the amount of rubbish and garbage that came out of these people. They seemed to want to justify their position all the time. And when they dug a bigger hole, they started digging a bigger hole. You know, it just kept on going down and down. I thought, you know, they come out the other side of the earth soon.
It's again, it's a recurring theme, David, that we see, that it's quite clear that CASA quite often get committed to a course of action that everybody in sundry can see is a ridiculous position, and it's only going to damage industry. It's not going to improve safety. It won't improve the industry, but it absolutely will damage the industry. It absolutely will create decline. It absolutely will eat away the last vestiges of trust that may exist between regulator and industry, and further agitate an already dysfunctional relationship. But they'll continue on because it seems that, it certainly appears this way, that it's more important in CASA to save face than it is to do the right thing. Wayne, 20 years of experience in working inside of the regulator. I mean, do you share these views?
That's right, Ben. And just to hit that point you just made, that the industry is getting damaged. Everywhere I go, and I'm still involved in industry, and I'm involved in building some hangars at Goulburn and doing all sorts of other little things. And I really don't want to be here doing this because I thought that the industry should be surviving, but it's not. And I've got to speak up. I saw the issue with Glenn, and that triggered me. I said, we've got to bring this to a head. This is not appropriate. But the issue you made about interface with CASA, everywhere I go, I hear people say, for goodness sake, don't get CASA involved. It'll turn into a drama. And we made a fundamental mistake, and I'll put it out there now. When we put this box up, or we made that bigger, the thicker faceplate, if we hadn't have even mentioned that to CASA, if we had have just said, oh, look, it's going to be exactly the same as the SDC, and surreptitiously behind the scenes, put the plate on, they would never know. They didn't do conformity inspection, so they wouldn't even know that that box was out there with a thicker faceplate. That's it.
You know, Wayne, this is a regulator. This is a regulator that I've watched. This is a regulator that I've watched over the last 4 years that I've been with AOPA go after people in a way that I have been astounded by. I mean, I was talking with a gentleman today who right now is preparing to go to the AAT to defend his position and is frustrated as hell that he's been exposed to massive costs, huge time imposts, the pressure and stress. And this is a professional working pilot. I think he's also an examiner, if I'm correct. Frustrated that instead of simply seeking to resolve these issues, instead of sitting down with the participants involved and saying, okay, look, we might have got this wrong, let's take a fresh look at this. The fact that there's no framework whatsoever within CASA, that when an outcome is arrived at that the parties truly disagree in their positions, that there is an independent panel that can sit down and look at these issues and try and resolve them before they turn into a legal bun fight that ends up costing industry enormously. And I figure I would love to know, and senators, if you're listening, and I know you're listening, how do we find out how much money CASA has spent in the last 20 years preparing themselves and running litigation against industry participants? What's the total value? How much money has been spent going after the participants of the industry? And more importantly, it would really behoove the government to try and understand and get an independent law firm to start reviewing all of the cases that have been run in the AAT regarding CASA decisions, and to start having a look at all of the cases to analyse what's going wrong here. Why are all these decisions being challenged all the time? If this is a safety regulator that's operating efficiently with the support of industry and is delivering outcomes that are in any way improving safety, why are we having all of these AAT hearings? Why is everyone constantly challenging the outcomes of CASA? And it's everything from pilot medicals to aircraft maintenance issues, to bloody logbook entries, and poor pilots who find themselves in a situation where they effectively might even have a misdemeanor, but CASA want to throw the book at them, take their license from them, and cost them tens of thousands of dollars to protect their right to participate in aviation. It's diabolical. There has to be some kind of process to review this. And so on the issue of review, both Wayne and David, did you at any point in time seek the assistance of politicians, the elected officials, those that are supposedly our representatives, our champions, that are supposed to be our voice? Did at any point in time you manage to reach out to anyone? Did anyone show any interest, aside from AMROBA, in helping fight with you and AOPA in trying to put a voice to this ridiculousness? Did anyone show any support for you? We'll start with David.
Well, I got to admit, Ben, no, I didn't. I just tried to keep it within our organisation and tried to get CASA to see where the issues were. We got to the ICC, and then we were going to, once that sort of failed, we're going to look at the next avenue. But I mean, McCormack doesn't seem to be a proper minister that's fit for the job in aviation. I haven't seen him do anything. So I think that if we can't get the view of the board, we can't get the CEO, well, what's the likelihood of getting to the minister? I guess we could have, gone out to other participants, other senators. In fact, we did contact the Senate committee, but our case wasn't really viewed at the time. So, but
roughly what year was that, David?
That was 2018. Yeah, pretty sure it was 2018. I'll have to just check my records. It was 2018, 2019, in fairly recently. I think maybe you might remember exactly, Ken, when we did that. So, and in fairness to the senators, and I have to say this because I've been fortunate enough to be able to work behind the scenes with a great number of them. They are inundated. They are inundated with issues that are coming at them left, right, and centre. And it's not just aviation. It's been a wonderful experience to be able to represent the membership of AOPA, and it truly has been a humbling experience. And I know, Ken, you and I have had plenty of conversation about this. That to be able to stand up for your industry and advocate on behalf of people who are being victimised and in many cases are being abused, and their rights are being abused, in many cases their rights are being taken away. It's been a wonderful experience to be able to be their champion and be their voice. But the thing that I've learned in this process is that these senators have exceptionally limited time, and to be able to expect to convey the depth of the problem and the challenge, and to be able to do it in a format in which they can walk away from it and concisely understand where the failure is stemming from and what needs to be done, is very, very difficult. And it is an incredibly disappointing experience when you come to the stark realization that the minister who's actually responsible for aviation doesn't give a stuff. And I tell you what, I'm troubled that I'm making that comment. I am deeply troubled that I'm making that comment. Michael McCormack does not give a stuff about this industry. If he cared for what was happening to hardworking Australians and what was being done to their businesses, he would have taken action by now, and he would have organised an industry-wide task force to start to look at all of these challenges to try and address it. But there's been nothing. And as I say this, it reminds me of some comments made by Alan Jones today. Alan Jones, I think, put a post out via his feed on social media saying it might well be time that the Nationals are finally going to roll Michael McCormack and send him out of the National Party no longer as their leader, because he has literally been a vacuum. He is a moment in space. He's there, but where is he? I mean, Wayne, as someone that's been in the system, you've worked for CASA. Obviously, this must be an incredibly embarrassing exercise to see an organisation that you clearly would have taken pride in working for devolve itself to such a point that Australian industry, jobs and opportunity are being destroyed, and have a minister who doesn't give a stuff. Your thoughts?
Well, exactly, Ben. I'm completely embarrassed that the system has got to where it is. It's not the Civil Aviation Safety Authority I knew. It's not even the DCA, the Department of Civil Aviation I knew. We're not doing anything like we could be doing, and we're not doing anything that's meaningful in the system. Now, as to Michael McCormack, I don't know where he is. He's been asleep at the wheel, and I don't know whether that's just because he's got bad advice or he's relying too much on CASA to give him some good information. But more to the point, of all the people that will be affected by this are his own constituents, the regional areas. The city people in aviation can probably survive very limited in their current climate because they've got a volume of activity. But out in the regions where the people out there require some means of transport to get around in the regional areas, the aeroplane is the only way to do it. And those aeroplanes aren't going to be there soon. They're all going to be gone.
Troubling times. Ken, you know, the ultimate question that needs to be asked here, and, you know, David, what we've heard this evening is just horrifying. And I just feel, I feel for you, and I feel for your business. I feel for your family. To have sold off your retirement investments in order to fund CASA's ineptitude and incompetence is just disgraceful, to say the least. It's a failure of catastrophic proportion, but it's a failure made all that much worse for the fact that they will probably get away with it, because there seems to be no politician with either the spine or the balls to stand up against a regulator that is clearly toxic and out of control. Now, I know I've got my critics, and I know that there'll be those within CASA tonight that will be watching this program saying, what the hell does this person know? What does he think he knows about us? We are so good. Well, the truth is, CASA, if you're as good as you are, why do these stories exist? If you're such a good regulator of this industry, why have we just watched a slow but certain destruction of our flight training, our maintenance and engineering, our aircraft manufacturing, our component overhaul, our component manufacturing? We have watched the systematic destruction of aviation. And whilst it may not be entirely CASA's fault, and I will state very clearly that we can't hold CASA accountable for other economic factors, what we do know is so far, the great number of people that we talk to all have very clear and demonstrable examples of how CASA have failed us as an industry. They have not improved safety in the process, and they have damaged our nation and our capacity to be involved in aviation going forward. So the question really begs, Ken, how do we change this? Right now, the CASA board and the minister are moving through a process in which they are looking for a new director of aviation safety. But I fear, Ken, that we are simply going to replace the captain on the bridge of the Titanic. How will simply putting someone else in the job fix these problems? And more importantly, who is the kind of person that we need to help steer this ship away from that giant damn iceberg? Your thoughts?
Let me go to the real issue. What is an aviation regulatory system? If any government puts in place an aviation regulatory system, surely the reason to have it there is so you can have an industry that can grow, create jobs, and create employment in this industry. You shouldn't have a regulatory system developed into such a format that is slowly killing off an industry. We need a government commitment. We need the board, and we need the CEO of CASA, all working towards developing and growing this industry, not running around just trying to make it hard for everyone in it. They should be concentrating very hardly on how to make it easier, simpler, but still retain safety. And safety is a culture, and a culture of people. Now, people in this industry that I know don't go and fly an aeroplane to kill themselves. They don't make changes to the aircraft, and they don't maintain it to allow the aircraft to go unsafe into the air. Everybody has a great culture about trying to keep aircraft safe so pilots fly it and get back on the ground again. what we've seen with the regulatory system that came in, and you can't blame the regulations greatly because it's the administration of those regulations is what causes success or it loses success. So it's very, very important that we get the right pick as the next CEO of CASA. In fact, we need more aviation people running on board that have a tremendous push to grow aviation in this country. Now, to do that, they need a commitment and a whole culture within the regulator to make sure they're out there working with the industry to improve the safety, to grow the industry, but to sit down and take out the red tape that is doing no good, and all it is putting cost on the Australian industry, so it's non-competitive with its own international partners.
Ken, there's obviously there's a lot of organisations in the back channels. Everyone's talking about this issue right now, and if you're involved in advocacy of any level within aviation, it is a hot topic. Who is going to be the next pick? There's a lot of discussion, and there's discussion that we've got Graham Crawford, who is the current deputy DAS of the, and I see you wince. I almost winced even harder. I personally think that he'd be the worst thing that would ever happen to the aviation industry in this country, and I would hope that the CASA board and that the minister take a good hard look at his particular role. I think it needs some real UV and it needs some real attention. Obviously, there are others that are putting their name forward from inside of CASA, and there's also potentially others from outside of CASA that may be coming in from organisations such as Air Services or possibly ATSB or even Department of Infrastructure. What worries me, Ken, and again, I'm not the most experienced guy in aviation, but I certainly have 2 ears and I have 2 eyes. From what I've seen, there appears to be an industrial grade washing machine on regurgitate and remix, in which we have all these people circulating and ruminating around the high levels of CASA, ATSB, Air Services and Infrastructure, and we're just recycling the same shit ideas. And as a consequence, what's happening is we are creating a system that is just imploding on itself. I mean, it seems so blatantly obvious to me, and to be honest, Ken, to many people across the industry, that CASA needs a refresh, not just with the DAS, but we need an entirely new upper team and middle team. We need to replace the current legal guy. You know, no offense, Jonathan Alec, but mate, you need to be put out to pasture, mate. You're past your prime. Move on. Find another industry and go ruin it, because frankly, the aviation industry can't continue to suffer at the same ideas for another 10 years. Someone's just posted right now, drain the swamp. It is time. It's time to drain the CASA swamp, and it is pretty swampy. And the same characters seem to have their names seem to appear time and time and time again throughout the history of all these issues. And I'm sure as we go forward over the next 12 months, we're going to hear more of those names. We're going to hear more of those names time and time again. So there is a real opportunity to put a refresh into this, but it's not really just a DAS moment, is it, Ken?
I think one of the issues we need desperately in this country, and other countries have done it, we need to go cap in hand to the FAA and bring some couple of very experienced management levels. They need to be brought and put into CASA to help us transition into the American system correctly. And I would say the American system is, everyone in the industry wants the FAR system. There's a couple of issues to do in the airlines, which likes the European. That can be put in place to satisfy the airlines. The regulators need to be understood, and we need to get a culture in CASA, which is about getting with the industry, pushing them up into it. Everyone in the industry likes to be above the basic standards, but we need some American regulator experience, and I'm talking about regulator experience, not someone from the industry. People who've got an understanding of the Australian system. Do we need to put CASA into a situation of administration while all this change is done? That's a question that's been thrown up to a number of people. Maybe the department should be have having a much more
Ken,
control.
I'd like to speak to this, Ken. And again, I'm going to jump in here. And gentlemen, we are going to be winding up here very shortly. And I really do appreciate everybody's time. And I really do mean that. We can't do any of this without people coming forward and agreeing to open up and have an honest conversation. And you are true Australian patriots for standing up and speaking honestly about what's going on. And ultimately, in the long run, as time progresses on and we look back, I'm certain that those of you that do speak up are going to be remembered as really being good, honest, true blue Australians. So thank you for that. But I want to speak on this issue of the concept of an administration, because Ken, I think it's got a lot of merit, and I draw a comparison to what happens. We see this happening quite a bit, unfortunately, and the reason we're seeing it happen a bit is that CASA are not alone in being a government organisation or authority or agency that has become toxic. There's quite a few right across the Australian economy that have lost sight of what they're there to do and who they're there to look after. And a great example is local councils. And councils find themselves in a position for a multitude of reasons where they end up with a massive toxic culture going on inside, whether it be a financial concern, a governance concern, or they're just unable to deliver service and look after their community. The state government moves to put them into administration. And through that process of administration, an independent team is brought in to effectively oversee the management and the decision-making of the organisation in order to return the organisation to its core function. And it removes the bias out of the system. It removes the corruption out of the system. And I think corruption is a big word that needs to be pointed at CASA. That is a giant corruption spotlight shone on that organisation. And there needs to be a great number of people really looked at. But an administration would afford the government an opportunity to bring in an independent management team to try and right some of the wrong. And there's a hell of a lot of wrong going on. And, Ken, you and I spoke about this afternoon. It could be an ideal situation that the Department of Infrastructure be appointed to hire that team and oversee that administration. And maybe in the process of that administration, some consideration can be given to what CASA might look like if the government were to pull it back under direct government management and have the minister directly responsible for it, potentially get rid of this word authority, make it an administration again, and actually start to have our minister, who is our representative, who is there in Canberra to represent us, the Australian people, the industry, have our minister take a direct hand. Because I'm quite often told when I speak to the minister's advisor and others that, the minister can't influence, the minister can't do this. Well, for God's sake, you're the Australian government. If you can shut an entire nation down due to COVID, you can fix these problems, right? You can fix these problems. These aren't outside of your realm of possibility. But to have the minister play a direct hand of control to ensure that the types of abuse, and, David and Wayne, what has happened to your business is an abuse. It's been an abuse. And you've suffered a huge financial impact, David, and I think that you should be pursuing that, and we should be working, Ken, as much as we can, AOPA and AMROBA, to try and help facilitate some opportunity there for David. The first opportunity would be to get him in front of the Senate so that he can testify and be given a level of protection so that they can actually name a lot of the names behind the scenes. I think it's important that every CASA staff member that had their fingerprints on that entire ordeal needs to be reviewed, and we need to find out, do they need a job at CASA anymore? And if they're not needed, it's time for them to move on as well. They can get out of the organisation and clear the pathway, so to speak. But an administration, Ken, what do you reckon? And would it give infrastructure and the government the tools and resources to rein in what is starting to look like really an out-of-control regulator?
I think the administration process, the FAA is an administration. They don't use words like authority anymore. It's a trend because their role is to help administer the industry. It's more factual to what their role is. They've got a mixture in their organisation and some excellent people in the organisation. It's got to be changed to cover the system so we can actually get leadership out of that area that'll help grow this industry. The leadership's not helping the industry grow. I mean, a lot of the changes they do in regulations, they actually make it harder for small business, individuals to participate. That's the opposite direction of what they should be doing. And as much as you can, at your point earlier, that if you attend any of their TWGs and their meetings or anything else, and you sign an attendance sheet, I'm gobsmacked. I don't necessarily agree with anything they propose at that meeting. Yet,
well, Ken, CASA is obviously a statutory authority, and as an authority as such, the government is going to claim it has very limited powers, and so the idea of bringing an administrative phase through would be rejected on the grounds it just wouldn't apply. So it's great in theory, and again, I think we're talking about this from a perspective that we need ideas on the table. I mean, this is part and parcel of the problem, is it not? That because of the way that CASA is structured as an authority, the government's hands end up being tied in many cases, and CASA are able to get away with things that they would not get away with if they were simply an administration. Is that not correct?
Well, why shouldn't it be part of the government portfolio? Like the HSBs works underneath the department. CASA, what's the difference? One's a regulator and one's an investigator. FAA is an instrument of the Department of Transport in the United States. It's got huge responsibilities. It's spelt right throughout the Act. Have a look. The department portfolio has on their website, CASA is responsible for the following items. But if you go and look at the Civil Aviation Act, those items aren't specified or spelled out in the Act. So CASA's got working to an Act, but it doesn't include the responsibilities which the portfolio department has placed on CASA, which I take the portfolio department placing that responsibility on CASA to actually mean that they have a responsibility directed by the government through that. So the government can intervene any time they like to fix up any of their agency.
Certainly, we're not going to solve all the problems this evening, Ken, but a conversation and at least some logical and I guess determined thinking has got to be a good thing. Wayne, obviously, as we close out for tonight, if you had the opportunity to try and fix this problem and you were given the power to do so, what would be the first steps you would take in trying to bring about a change so that this type of thing never, ever happens again in this country to an Australian business seeking to try and get their product to market?
That's a huge ask. I think at the end of the day, the issue's got to start with the cleaning out the top management area of CASA. If it still remains as an authority, clean out the top level, because clearly the managing there are not managing. The next thing I would do would be to reach out to the industry and say, for goodness sake, if you're contemplating getting out of it, don't. We've now got a change system coming, which will hopefully protect you and fix up the problems. It'll be a big ask. It'll be a big task. But if just yesterday, we found another organisation is Bankstown is going to pull the pin. You know, how many more do we have to hear happening to, and we can't do anything about it? I think the parliamentarians from both sides of politics have to stand up and say, look, we're losing an industry. We've got the Labor Party people screaming about jobs being lost. Well, we're losing jobs. And we've got the politicians on the government side saying, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I remember Malcolm Turnbull standing up and saying, we are going to be an innovative country. We are going to be doing this. We're going to be value-adding manufacturing. None of that has occurred. I think we're at a watershed at this point, and I think the writing's on the wall. If we can't, in the next couple of weeks or a few months, get some sort of clear commitment from the parliamentarians to get this sorted out, we might as well forget it. They've got to remember, if nothing in aviation is rosy, if they think just being able to get on seat 1A for the trip home and everything in aviation is good, they're living in a dream world.
Well, Wayne, I thank you very much for coming forward, and I reiterate just how important it is that gentlemen like yourself stand up and speak about these issues. And I think that if any former CASA staff members that are out there that might be watching this broadcast or may have this broadcast shared with them, I encourage you to come forward, reach out and come forward and have a conversation with us, and to consider taking part in a Facebook Live panel and to talk about your experiences inside of the regulator and how we could be working to try and solve the problems, because we do need a constructive working relationship between aviation regulation and industry. It's the only way that we're going to have an industry that employs people and it will be sustainable. And so we have to get to that point. I mean, David, obviously this is a big risk for you to be seen doing something like this. You've detailed that obviously you have been exposed to threats being made. You've obviously been through the worst possible experience that someone can be part of, and you've lost significant contracts and it's cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, what's the outlook for you? Where do you go from here? I mean, and I know that that's a difficult question, and I know you're probably sitting there thinking, well, where the bloody hell do you think I'm going to go, Ben? But where do you go from here?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not sure. I've had issues with my 21M renewal, which is, I kind of look at as the payback for the issue. Same people are involved with the APMA, and it continued on with that. So I don't know where, I mean, I don't know whether they can do much more to me, and whether I want to continue on with aviation, that's another issue. I mean, it's something that I really want to do for life. It was my life career. And like a lot of people viewing here now, aviation, it's not just a job, it's a passion. For the people that seem to be in the regulator, it's just a job for them. But the majority of us out in the industry, it is a passion. And keeping in mind that from the onset of the birth of aviation, Australia was opened up by people in aeroplanes, and we opened up the whole communities. And I can remember being at Bankstown Airport in the 1980s, and we were number 6 to take off. I mean, we were lining up on the taxiways. There wasn't enough space in the run-up bays. And you go out to Bankstown Airport now, it's just decimated. And they're just selling it off to commercial properties and the rest of it. So a lot of people don't have any interest in aviation. But keep in mind that Australia developed through aviation. And I know a lot of people like sitting in seat 1A on a commercial jet, but it was general aviation that got the people to get to the commercial aviation stage to the airlines. So, and we had a good safety record all the way through, but I'm fearful that the decline of people being trained in aviation in Australia is, getting worse. I can't recommend people to go into aviation now, but because I can see what's happening, and it's a sad day, and I don't really want to see aviation disappear, but it's getting to the point very close. I think the whole industry is going to collapse. So I think we've got to do something. And that's why I'm standing up now, is the fact that I've gone through all this, and it'll probably will continue on. As long as I hold my approval, they'll go out to get me. Don't you worry, tomorrow I'll have a few phone calls to find out what I've been doing or whatever. The retribution will come a second time around, so I'm prepared for that. But at least
David, if just on that point, mate, and I want to make very clear, if you are on the receiving end of any form of retribution, you bring it forward and we'll make it public, and there'll be an impassioned public plea to see to it that any person within that regulator that seeks to come after you for speaking up on this important issue, I'll make it my life's mission to see to it that that person never has another job working in government aviation regulation again. It is unacceptable. It is unacceptable that the participants of our industry be subjected to that type of unnecessary harassment. It's just not right. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ben. Thank you for that. But I just think of all the other people in the aviation industry, whether you're a pilot, you're an operator, owner, whatever context. I mean, everyone appears to have a story. Wonderful organisations just shut down in Australia because they just can't afford to continue on because the regulators just got too much of influence on everything. Moving offshore to other places because you can't get your products marketed because the fact that the regulator hasn't got off their backside to propagate, reciprocal agreements, and it just seems to be a lack of general interest. So that's, I don't know how we've got to strip the regulator down to its core, I think, and then start again. We've got to get rid of the upper management, middle management, the board, the CEO. Everyone has to go. I think Ken's idea of an administrator, putting with a couple of independent people that are FAA, suitably trained, that knows about aviation, not just somebody who likes to think and play around in aviation, somebody who's serious and start the whole process again. So I think until that happens, we're probably not going to go anywhere. But, you know, we've been a great nation. We've got a lot of innovators, a lot of great people that have got a great passion for aviation. And I think it's a shame to see that destroyed. But we need to keep on going. We need to keep the fight going. So even though I say, well, yeah, my wife would like me to get out of it now, but I need to continue on to see it because that's been my passion, and I don't want to see it go down the tube. One question I would like to ask, and you could find out from me, Ben, CASA say, well, the aviation industry is growing because there's more aircraft. Well, I would like to know how many actually active maintenance releases are signed for Australian aircraft, registered aircraft at the moment. Because where I look, you know, you can hardly see an aeroplane move. Well, I know COVID-19's killed a lot of it, but I would really like to know how many, not aeroplanes parked up in hangars and pulled apart. I want to find out how many active aeroplanes that are in Australia at the moment.
Well, David, it's a bloody interesting question, and it's one that I've put forward to the Senate now 2 or 3 times. I mean, Ken, I think you were even sitting in one of the inquiries when I raised it. I make a point of raising it because it is one of my most fundamental beliefs with respect to CASA's communications, that they are incredibly disingenuous in their annual report. I mean, they paint a picture of themselves, which is that they are this highly successful organisation. They're doing such a great job of the Australian aviation industry. And yet the truth of the situation is that if the DAS would get off his ass and get in a light aircraft and go fly to almost any location across Australia where general aviation is based, you'll find hangars full of old aeroplanes that are still registered, that are not airworthy. They're not contributing to aviation. And so when that annual report is issued, in which CASA say to the government, what a great job we've done. Aircraft registrations have increased by 1.3% in the last 12 months. It's bullshit. It's a lie. Not because it's not true. Yes, technically, the number of aircraft registrations went up by 1.3%. That's technically correct. The lie is that they know damn well that the vast majority on that list quite possibly aren't contributing anything to aviation. Now, I'm an example. We've just sold a whole stack of aeroplanes through my father's company, and they're all going to the Philippines. They're gone. What a tragic outcome, that the aeroplanes are worth nothing here in Australia and you've got to sell them overseas. Philippine government encouraging Filipino flight training schools and maintenance companies to get organised and to go out and buy aircraft and to start tooling up and start skilling up and start training their young people on how to be involved in aviation, because the government recognises that aviation can lift the middle class. It can create jobs, technical trades. It can create opportunities. And by creating those aviation opportunities, it's going to open the door to aerospace opportunities that take them into space, that take them into electric UAV, that take them into high technology composites. They get it. They get it. Right now in this country, we're struggling to even get apprentices their licenses because the training system is so broken. I saw online today, Senator Jackie Lambie is out calling for a wholesale review of the way that young people are provided training, saying we don't need to give kids entire qualifications. We've just got to get them started. We were standing in the hangar today, Wayne, and I said to you, I love working on aeroplanes. I think it's a really wonderful experience. And, you know, I guess there's people out there that love flying them. There's people who love flying them and working on them. I really enjoy working on them. But the system is structured that I can't, how do I get involved and explore potentially getting a license to formally work on them? And even if I could right now, chances are the process would be so convoluted, so bloody expensive that it wouldn't be worth my time. And so it is almost hard to not feel entirely compassionate towards the young people of this country to realise that the aviation industry and system being left to the youth today is a disgrace, and that they are being gifted the most disjointed and broken system that could ever be imagined. And we've got to fix it. And that's why I do what I do. I'm involved in it. I get asked this question all the time. Ben, why the hell are you involved in this? You could be off working for much bigger organizations, spending your time on really positive, engaging stuff. Why are you doing this? You're killing yourself, running around the countryside trying to represent this. What are you thinking? We need to fix it. It's that simple. This can be fixed. It can be fixed. This is not something that is so broken it can't be fixed. We can reverse this. But to reverse it, we need a government that's willing to work with us. And right now what we've got, and I'm going to speak honestly here. We've got a government that absolutely refuses to sit down and meet. We've got a regulator that's so scared shitless of me, they don't want to sit in the same room as me because they know I'll speak my mind and I just won't swallow bullshit. And I'll just say, I'm sorry, I don't accept it. And by the way, what you're doing is wrong. And I think the public need to know about it. They're so scared of public scrutiny. They're so frightened of being exposed that the answer is don't deal with anyone. Just, and it's ridiculous. I mean, this is not a solution. These aren't the behaviors of a professional world-class safety regulator. It's the behavior of a toxic group of children that are scared that the toys might get taken away from each other. It's just ridiculous. So we can solve it. And to solve it, you're right, David, we've got to get the right people. And you're right, Wayne, we've got to get people who are qualified. And you're right, Ken, we've got to have a regulator that's supporting industry. These things can be done. This can be done. But what's being done right now is not getting us any closer. CASA, wake up. The clock is ticking. You won't have much of an industry left. And I would dare say, if we eventually get to that final point in time where the industry collapses, what's CASA needed for? Do we need a regulator once they're gone? No. So you're putting yourselves out of business, people. It's not very good economics. Embrace opportunity. Let's change this system. Let's fix it. Let's give Australian industry a fighting chance. So thank you, everyone, for your time tonight. 2 hours is a long session. I tend to find they're probably long because I talk too much. Kennel agrees, like Ben's a submarine. He'll talk underwater. But it's something it's worth fighting for, and that's the message. And so for our viewers out there that have been watching tonight's broadcast, you may have your own really interesting story or an experience with CASA, and you might want to stand up and be counted and to share that story so that we can try and create an environment where the regulator can learn. And I'd like you to know that we want to have a conversation with you, and I invite you to reach out to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. My mobile number is 0415 577 724. Those in the industry would know that my mobile phone number is available. If you want to call me, have a conversation. You're always going to get an audience, and we're always going to have a conversation. So don't fear not doing it. Get into it. At least let us know. And I can say this, already tonight, I've got a pile of messages that are piling in from people saying, Ben, I want to have a chat. And even my Facebook is starting to light up. So do it. Reach out and have a conversation. Stand with us. And more importantly, I'm going to put a plug in for AOPA this time. We couldn't do any of this. Any of us, we couldn't be doing what we're doing today without the support of AOPA. And love AOPA or hate AOPA, whatever your past historical experience with the organisation may or may not have been, and frankly, I don't care. What I care about is what we're doing today and tomorrow. Support us. We are representing you. We're fighting for you. We are unashamedly wanting to see this industry succeed, and we are so determined to achieve that goal. And we're not going to stop until we achieve that goal. And here's the great news. We are not going to stop. This is not going to stop. We're going to continue to fight and to see to it that the voice of this industry is heard, and that we have an industry at the end of this process that can function and succeed. And so it's $159 to pledge your support and to help give us the financial tools that we need to do the job properly. And so put aside your past experiences, put aside your grievances, put aside whatever may be going on, and do one thing for me. I have fought for you, and I have fought for this industry, I'd like to believe, harder than most people. And I have never done it for the recognition. I've never done it to be regarded as the hero of aviation. That's not why I do it. But do one thing for me. Join AOPA. Pledge that $159 support and help me take this fight to the government to help change your industry and to set this industry on the right direction. And we won't always have all the answers, but I promise you one thing that we do have: an absolute willingness to work with everybody. We will work with everyone. And I'd love to see that moment in time where the minister finally puts his foot down and says, let's get the industry to the table. Let's take the people that we've regarded as our critics, and instead of treating them like they're pariahs, let's bring them in and let's understand their concerns, and let's try and fix this system, because we are going to get there. But we are going to get there. It's not a case of never going to get there. We are going to get there. And so be part of that push and help put the fuel in our tanks so that we can get to that point, because it's not going to be easy and it's going to take a little bit of a brush to make it happen. So just do one thing for me. That's all I'm asking. www.aopa.com.au/membership. No, we can't give you a magazine. No, I'm not going to be able to give you an AOPA card that's going to get you 50% off at JB Hi-Fi. No, we're not going to be able to get you half-price aircraft insurance. No, I'm not going to be able to get you, even possibly most of anything for free. I'll tell you what I'm going to get you. I'm going to be the strongest, most dedicated advocate for general aviation that we've ever had. And I'm going to fight for you all. And we're going to change the system. Just like we've fought to introduce the new private pilot medical standards, just like we fought to get a change to the Civil Aviation Act, just like we fought to create the Pilot Medical Review Panel to get pilots flying again, and just like we are fighting for Glenn Buckley, just like we are fighting for you, David, just like we are fighting for so many others, we want this industry to work. And so that's all I ask, is to just, whilst I'm pledging my support of you, for you guys to try and do the return, because we need your support. We can't do it without you. We don't get any government funding. We don't qualify for many grants. We can only succeed by having our collective membership help fund it. And so thank you very much to our guests. Thank you again to our members and industry supporters. Thank you to all the senators and the MPs that are involved behind the scenes in taking this information. And thank you to everyone's put comments up tonight. And we'll be back again next Tuesday with another set of panelists. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ben.